Welcome back to Basic Business Training 1. We're so glad that you've been able to join us again. If you remember, in our last session, we were talking about business people throughout Scripture and how God has used business people to move forward His kingdom and our knowledge about who He is. We want to continue that in this session. We also want to take a look at what are the hindrances to us integrating our faith and our work in our workplace. And then lastly, we want to look at goals and how to set goals in this session. So I hope you have your workbooks with you and you're ready to get to work because we are going to get started. We looked at the Old Testament in the last session and different people in the Old Testament who were doing business as God was using them to fulfill His purpose, the Great Commitment, the Great Commandment, and the Great Commission. Now we want to switch to the New Testament and just look at a couple of examples. There's many, and again, you have that chart in your workbook that you can be looking at for the different examples of business people in the New Testament. But we want to focus in on Jesus because we tend to view Jesus through the lens of His last 3 years of ministry, where, of course, He was doing the public ministry that God had sent Him to do. But we want to also remember that He lived 30 years on earth prior to starting His public ministry, and He was actually doing the ministry of the Great Commitment. He was living out His purpose by doing His work, and His work was in a carpentry shop. Joseph, of course, was his father, and he was a carpenter, and Jesus was the eldest son and was taught how to do carpentry. And we know that generally they would start at about the age of 12 to begin their work. And so we believe that Jesus spent about 18 years doing business. And so we don't think of Jesus as a businessman often. We don't think of him working and thinking about sales and thinking about marketing. But certainly that was part of it, maybe different marketing that we might do today, but He needed to attract customers. The other thing that we know is that Jesus was the eldest son, and Joseph, we believe, died when Jesus was still a young man. In Mark 6, verse 3, when we hear the people questioning Jesus, they say, "Isn't this the son of Mary? Isn't this just a carpenter?" The son of Mary and the brothers and sisters, it lists there. And what we pick up there is that Joseph is no longer mentioned. And so Jesus, as the eldest son, had to begin to take on the care for his family and providing for them in significant ways. And that's a powerful thing for us to think about, that we have a Savior and a high priest who understands running a business, understands having to provide for families, and understands some of the challenges that we have ourselves in the workplace. He had to train his younger brothers, and that couldn't have been easy. Jesus, so 85% of Jesus' life was as a carpenter. Of the public appearances that he then did when he started his public ministry, the majority of them were in the marketplace. And what we believe is that the impact of those 18 years of Jesus as a businessman then impacted how he did ministry. He didn't go to the tabernacles and to the religious institutions. Rather, he spent his time in the marketplace talking to people, and people that he could relate to as well because of where he had spent the majority of his life. When you look at the parables, you might be amazed to know that of the 52 parables that Jesus told, 45 had a workplace context. And that was because Jesus had immersed himself in the marketplace, and he had lived this life as a businessman, and that was now coming out in his teaching. He was not preaching from simply a theological perspective of presenting who God was. He was telling people stories that they could relate to through their work. Some of those key themes for the parables were construction, winemaking, farming, ranching, management and labor, crop yield, misuse of money, venture capital in high-risk situations, family-owned business, hostile takeovers, return on investment, future markets, management criteria, and so on. These were the themes of the parables, and we don't think about that very often. We often think of Jesus as a high priest and the Son of God, and we forget that, yes, he was the Son of God, he was also the Son of Man, fully God and fully man, and he can identify with these challenges, and he speaks about these challenges. In fact, I wonder if you know that Jesus spoke more about money than he spoke about heaven and hell combined. Did you know that 1 out of 7 verses in the New Testament is about money? Did you know that there are 500 verses in the whole Bible on prayer, 500 verses on faith, and nearly 2,000 verses on money in the Bible? God knows the challenges that we have, and he is trying to give us guidance and direction, and recognizes that this is an important and critical part of our life, because we spend the majority of our waking hours in the marketplace and working within economic systems. These are not coincidences. God cares about this and offers us commands, wisdom, advice, and direction on how to stay healthy, happy, and content. Jesus understood that challenge, and it came out in the way he did his ministry. But not only was Jesus very immersed in the marketplace, when we think about his disciples, that is also were people that he chose that were engaged in the marketplace. Jesus did not go to the local Bible college or seminary, the Jewish institutions for training in order to recruit his disciples. He went to the marketplace. And what we can know is that Nathanael was probably a farmer. We know that Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen. And when you think about just that, 1/3 of the disciples were fishermen. Why might that be? Why would Jesus spend his time getting his disciples from those who were fishermen? What were the qualities? There has to be something there. I don't think that was just coincidence. And so when we ask this question to people, often people will say, well, they were good at fishing fish, and so they had to be good at being fishers of men. And that's true. That's a nice way to make that statement. But what were those qualities? Fishermen certainly had to be patient, right? I mean, they would sit sometimes the entire night and looking for a catch, and sometimes they wouldn't get one. And certainly we know in being fishers of men that we have to be patient as well. But fishermen also had to be risk takers. And we know that the Sea of Galilee, because the scripture describes that these storms would come up very suddenly. And it was because Galilee was a lake that was in a volcano. And so the storms would come very suddenly upon them. And so they had to be willing to be risk takers, to put their life at risk out in these waters. But we also know that the fishermen had relationships. They were networked within the marketplace. They were tough, they were rough, they were real people, and they had real relationships, and they were able to take that and be able to apply it then to their life. And we know, of course, that some of these disciples just became amazing apostles to help build the church. And so none of the 12 were leaders in the temple or in the synagogue. In fact, we can even look at the Gospels and realize that the Gospels were also written by marketplace leaders. Matthew was a former tax official. Mark was a part of a wealthy merchant family. Luke was a medical doctor. He was also a Gentile. And John, of course, was a fisherman. And so when we begin to change our perspective on Scripture and we begin to see through the eyes of how God used business and how Jesus used business to further the ministry, we see that the business world, the marketplace, is not an appendix to the mission of God. It is rather the way in which God expected and anticipated that his church would be built. As we go about the highways and byways of life, as we go about our business, we are to be making disciples. We are to be carrying Christ with us. We are to be disciples in every place and in every space. But we do see that there is a hindrance for many of us on integrating faith and work. And we want to look at some of these things that you will see in your workbook as well. What are these things that hinder us from integrating faith and work? Well, for some, there's a fear of wealth creation. There's a fear that wealth, if we are making money, we might become lovers of money. That just simply by being around money, that there is a corruption that will necessarily follow. We certainly know, and that's why Jesus speaks about this so often, that there is a temptation of that there is the potential for us to love our money more than we love God, just as the rich young ruler did. And so that is a temptation, but it doesn't mean that it has to happen. And we have examples like Abraham and Job and very wealthy people who kept Jesus, God, on the throne of their life. We also see that there is an expectation that we do multiply, that we do make profit, that we do create wealth. We see that in Deuteronomy 8:18. But we also see it in the parable of the talents. And I'm guessing that's something that you're familiar with, that not only was stewardship about maintaining, right? The third person who received the one bag, one talent, he maintained it. He didn't squander it. He didn't waste it. He didn't lose it. He just maintained it. And that was not satisfactory. We are about multiplying it. We are to take what God has given us, our time, our talent, and our treasure, and we are to be multiplying it. And that's where wealth creation comes in, because we can't help other people unless we have created some of that ourselves. So we are not to look after, but we are to add value. We are co-creators with God. And so that's one hindrance for the integration of faith and work. Another integration is corruption. There is a fear, again, that the marketplace is a place of darkness, and if we enter the marketplace, that corruption is going to enter in, and therefore we must remove ourselves from the marketplace. But corruption is a human condition. It's not a business condition. Zephaniah 3, verses 3 through 4 says, "Her officials within her are roaring lions," talking about the church. "Her rulers are evening wolves who leave nothing for the morning. Her prophets are unprincipled. They are treacherous people. Her priests profane the sanctuary and do violence to the law." Now that's a tough verse to hear. But what we know is that the church is not exempt from having corruption within the church. And we see billions of dollars that are wasted by the church every year in gifts that are given to help the church be more effective. We see corruption there as well. And so corruption is a human condition. It doesn't matter what system you are a part of, there's going to be corruption. What we have to do is learn how to protect ourselves and to be disciples and have that positive influence. And so the marketplace is not a place where we run away from, but we remember that we have been given the light, and that light is greater because of who Jesus is in us. Another hindrance in the integration of faith and work is what we call the Elijah syndrome. The Elijah syndrome comes from 1 Kings 19, 14, and 18, where Elijah thought he was the only one that had not bowed his knee to Baal. And then Elijah is informed that there were 7,000 more. He was not alone. In my many interviews with business people around the world, I hear over and over that there is such loneliness, that there is not somebody that is supporting them, that they can talk to, that they can share the burdens. In fact, oftentimes, even within a marriage, the wife does not necessarily tell the husband of the business struggles. The husband doesn't always tell the wife. And so we live in isolation. And of course, Satan loves that. He loves for things to remain in darkness and does not want us to bring these into the light. And so we need to remember that this is why a church-based marketplace ministry is so important, so that we can have fellowship together, that we can talk about times where we contributed to a bribe, where we made an unethical decision, because that's what we do as human beings. We are tempted. Jesus did not sin in his temptations, but we do. And we have to talk about that and have accountability and encouragement for us to be able to do better and to improve in that. The last hindrance to integration of faith and work that I want to address is that sometimes we just don't know how. We don't know how to integrate our faith and work. We don't know what it means. And I've heard people say, I pray in the morning when I open my shop, I pray in the evening when I close my shop, but I don't really know how else to integrate my faith and my work. And that's where, again, the importance of the church gathered is, because that is where we need to be equipped and taught and encouraged and commissioned and reminded of how to do our work as an act of worship. One of the things that a leader of a church said to me one time is that churches should teach wealth creation and wealth management before they even ask for a tithe. And I thought that was a risky statement to say, because that's a lot to ask. We think asking for a tithe is just part of what we do as a church. And what this man was saying was that we should not, just as fathers should not exasperate their children, that pastors and church leaders should not exasperate their members by asking for something when they haven't necessarily learned that wealth creation is a good and a holy thing. And then as God gives us wealth, we have all these scripture verses about how to handle and manage money. And there is a great need for us to be taught financial management. And so those are things that we want to keep thinking about, that wealth creation, wealth management, these are important principles that are not secular. They are not belonging to outside the church, but they belong to the work that we have been called to do when we are scattered and gathered. We see that there is a mistaken holiness hierarchy, and you will see a picture of that in your handbook as well. And that is another thing that hinders our integration of faith and work. And that is that we believe that pastors and missionaries are the most holy. After that, we have doctors and lawyers are seen as holy. Then we have teachers and social workers. And wherever I talk to business people, they believe they are at the bottom of the holiness hierarchy. And what we want to do is to put a great big X over that and say there is no holiness hierarchy. What people are doing in the marketplace, in the spheres of government and education and business, is that they are the closest to Satan's command and control centers. They are the ones who are right there where the darkness is very present, and they are able to bring the light. And so we want to recognize that there is no holiness hierarchy, but there needs to be an integration of pulpit pastors and marketplace ministers. And so those are things that I hope that you have a chance to discuss amongst yourself. Which of these hindrances are happening with you as you are going about your work? Which of these challenges do you face, do you struggle with, or maybe for your church, that your church struggles with as well? Now we want to talk about goals. And goals feels like a very simple subject, and yet I have found that it's one of the most challenging for business people to actually be effective and successful at fulfilling their goals. Now, every business member that I meet, that I interview, I ask them, what are your goals for your business? Everyone has goals. So having goals is not the problem. Having goals is something that's actually easy to do. Implementing them and being successful in achieving them, that's where there's a significant barrier. And so in this section right now, we continue to work on the foundation of our business, right? We're working on understanding that God is the owner of our business, that we are the managers, that God has a mission for our business, that business is a good and holy thing. And therefore, if God is the owner, we are the managers, God must have some goals for this business. And so we want to take some time to pray about that and to think through that. But we also want to look at how to be successful in having our goals. And so I want to think through the very important quadruple bottom line. And so I'm hoping that you're getting used to that term. I've explained it a few ways, and I will do so again. Quadruple bottom line is really 4 goals, 4 outcomes that we are looking for. And we base those, just to remind you, on the 3 great directives. And so the first great directive, if you remember, is the Great Commitment. That's from Genesis 1 and 2. And from that directive, there are 2 goals, or 2 bottom lines, that we are looking for. We are looking for an economic goal. What is the economic goal that you have for your business? That one is pretty easy for business people to articulate. But the second one comes out of Genesis 2:15, where God says that we are to work and to care for the environment. What is your environmental or your creation care goal? What is it that you can do to help this world, this creation, worship God in and through your business? The next one then is, of course, the Great Commandment, where we are told to love God and to love our neighbor. Who is God calling you to love? This is what we call our social goal. Who is God calling you to love in your place of business? And sometimes we think that love only means that we are giving a donation, or as a business we need to share the profit, and sharing the profit is great, but remember that we have time, treasure, and talent. You might be called upon to give some time to volunteer in your community, to share your talent by training others and helping apprentices to learn what you are doing and to mentor others. And so we have a social goal based on loving our neighbor. Lastly, of course, we have the Great Commission, and that is where we are been called to make disciples. And of course, we want to be a disciple first. And that's so important. It's so easy for us to want to make disciples, but we have to first be able to be a disciple in order for our life to communicate it. We don't want to simply vocalize what we are not living. We need to live it and speak it in one accord at the same time. And so we want to talk about that. And I want to just spend a few minutes on sustainability, on the environmental goal, because over my years of working with businesses, that's sometimes the one that people struggle with. I think it's becoming more obvious and it's talked about a lot more, but I just want to spend a few minutes here. And the idea of this is what is called sustainability. And it's about ensuring long-term business success while contributing toward economic and social development, a healthy environment, and a stable society. And so those are all very good things. We want economic and social development in our nations. We also need a healthy environment for that to happen and a stable society. So sustainability is not just about cleaning up your own space. It's about keeping tidy an even bigger space that belongs to everyone. And so often when I look at people's business plans, I will see that their environmental or their creation care goal is to sweep their place of business every day. And that's a good start. I mean, that's also marketing, right? Because customers want to come to a clean place, and cleanliness is next to godliness and those things. But we want to also look even bigger and even beyond that. And one of the texts that I love is Deuteronomy, well, maybe I shouldn't use the word love, Deuteronomy 23, verses 12 through 14. It's a very interesting text, and I'll tell you the story behind this. I was teaching in Ghana, and I was teaching at a Christian university, and in the front row was the dean of the theology department with his PhD, and a little bit intimidating, and then there was other pastors and students and business people in the as participants as well. And as we were talking about an environmental goal or creation care, he raised his hand and he said, I actually did my dissertation for my PhD on Deuteronomy 23, 12 through 14, and I'd like to read it for you. And so this is what the text says. It says, designate a place outside a camp where you can go to relieve yourself. As part of your equipment, have something to dig with, and when you relieve yourself, dig a hole and cover up your excrement. For the Lord your God moves about in your camp. Your camp must be holy, so that he will not see among you anything indecent and turn away from you. I have to admit that I kind of smiled, and I thought, wow, you wrote your PhD on those verses. That is something. I actually would love to see that. But you know what? Over the years, since I had that conversation, it has struck me how important those verses are. God cares about how we keep our camp. God cares to such extent that he gives people instructions on how to keep our camp, because he is a holy God. We want God to draw near to us. Just because Jesus came and we have salvation and redemption through him, it doesn't change who God is. He is a holy God, and he wants and needs and desires and demands that we keep a holy camp. And so how is our camp doing? How is your camp doing? Have we been successful at keeping a holy camp so that God is able to draw near to us? And sometimes we do what we can, and we can't always have an impact on others, and that's okay. We begin the process with ourselves. We begin in our own homes. We begin in our own environment. And so some realities to think through is that plastic bottles that we use, they will last for 450 years, we are told, before they will decompose fully. If you use disposable diapers or Pampers, those also take about that long. If we use styrofoam takeaway packs, and in so many countries now we are seeing takeaway packs being used, those take 50 years, and they leave chemicals in the soil when they decompose. And so we have to think about especially single-use plastic and how our oceans are being filled with it. In fact, they say that there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish by the year 2050. That plastic is now beginning to leach into our drinking water. Even as they purify our drinking water, there are still some traces of plastic in it. They are finding plastic in the fish that we eat. They are finding plastic in the salts that we eat. And this can't be good for our body, which is a temple of God. And so what do we do about that? There are things that we need to look at and consider for ourselves. And as we think about our environmental bottom line, I want you to open your mind to think through the bigger picture in your home, in your community, in your church, and in your business. So as we go to the quadruple bottom line, we want to answer the following questions as you think about these 4 goals that we will ask you to write out. First, what are the proactive ways that my business can reflect my God-given calling within each of the bottom lines? Second, what examples around me already show these traits within each bottom line? I'm sure that you know of some business people who have a missional bottom line, and they have integrated their faith and their work very well, and we can tell you so many stories of how people have done that, and it's exciting. I'm sure you also know of people that have integrated a social bottom line. They have figured out how to love their neighbor, how to love their customer, how to love their employees, and we need to tell those stories to encourage each other. Many of us know economic bottom lines where people have, it seems that they have just the silver spoon in their mouth, whatever they touches turns to gold, and they have some great ideas for economic growth. And lastly, an environmental or a creation care bottom line. My guess is you've heard some stories as well. I was recently working in Cameroon, and they have designed a way to make bricks for houses out of plastic, and they are much stronger than the cement blocks that they had been using. And so you see that creativity, and you can see those ideas coming up, and those are good things. And so I encourage you to tell each other stories at the end of this session and share with each other, because God has given his people the solutions to the challenges that we see in our world. So let me give you some other examples. A social goal could be employment practices that are exemplary. How can you love your employees? What does it mean to love your employees? It means making them part of the team, having team meetings, and letting them know that if the business is successful, they too will be successful. It may mean giving them a vacation or holiday time. It may mean that you do other things that respect and honor them as employees. And what about for your customers as well? What can you do to let them know that they are important to you, learning their names? And we'll talk about some of that in our marketing session. Economic goals. You can have an economic goal to grow, but what about also making sure that you are conducting your financial management honestly and with integrity and with accountability? Those are some goals that you can set for yourself for economic goals. Environmentally, we've talked about it, decreasing your own waste. How can you do things that will honor and help creation worship? And missionally as well, commit your business to God through daily prayer, seeking his will for what is he already doing in and through your business, and what does he want from you in that. The primary function of goals is that they are the desired end results that provide long-term direction for the business. And so as you think about your goals, you're thinking 1 to 2 to 5 years out. I would not recommend you go further than 5 years, because it becomes, especially if you are a smaller business, it becomes difficult to manage for that. But you might have 3-month goals, 6-month goals, all the way out to 5 years. And what we're praying for is that God gives us a vision for his business. We are managers for how to direct that process so that 5 years from now we can achieve what God has asked us to do. Our goals give us guidance for the business and help us focus our further direction. They cast vision for the future of the business and give the owners something to work towards, and they provide motivation for us to continue working. And so the encouragement that we want to give to you is that your goals are not just for yourself. Your goals are for your business. And the business includes those stakeholders that are important to the business, who also want to know and be aware of what your future plans are and pray with you through that, whether it is your spouse, whether it is people in your church, whether it is your employees, or whoever else may be involved. And so goals are that motivation. When we come back in our next session, we are going to talk specifically how to strategize and prioritize your goals so that you can be successful in them. So for now, we'll begin thinking about your goals in these 4 different areas. And when we come back, we will look at strategies and objectives to achieve those goals so that at the end of the day, you can say, God, you have done it. Thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you next time.